30% of the total direct tax collections. So if we exclude the impact of the withholdings from the direct taxes collections, and if we consider this withholding as indirect taxes, then our percentage of direct taxes versus the total collection comes to around meager 12%. So this is a very alarming situation, and we have to have some correction in terms of the mix of the what the taxes are being collected and how much there should be a direct tax collection. If we look into the sectoral analysis of the taxes collections, if the contribution of the agriculture in the GDP is around 20%, but they are effectively making a negative contribution in the taxes. Likewise, if we look into the retail and the wholesale sector, they are having the share of 18.5%, but their contribution in terms of the taxes is very nominal, 1%. But if you look into the contribution of the manufacturing and the services sector, the contribution in terms of the tax collection versus the percentage of their contribution in the GDP is highly disproportionate. So we have to basically look into these disproportionates and make certain corrections in terms of policies, so that there should be an equitable collection of the taxes from all the sectors of the economy. Before going towards the proposals, I would also like to mention the certain reforms which have been introduced by this government over the last few years, and these were very positive reforms which were made. For example, I would like to mention particularly the concept of filer and the non-filer, which have been introduced in the income tax law. This is very, very good attempt to identify and marginalize the businessmen and the taxpayers who are actually not filing the tax returns, but they are making payment of taxes, but they are hiding behind, and they are not basically coming out and effectively coming into the tax system. Likewise, there is a very good system which has been introduced in the sales tax, which is called Strive, and under this system, the input taxes, which has been a very, very major chronic problem for the FBR in the recent past, that the input taxes were claimed as a refund, which were actually not paid into or arrived into the government treasury. So by virtue of this new system, the input tax, the check and balance on the input tax claims have been introduced. Now, input taxes are being allowed only when the tax has been paid by the seller. So this is a very, very good reform which has been done by the recent government. And the last, the membership of the OECD, which has now resulted into two recent multilateral agreements which have been signed by the government, which one relates to the common reporting standard and the other one relating to the country-by-country reporting system. So by virtue of these two agreements, and I hope that there will be further agreements in terms of the BEPS, which has been introduced worldwide. So by virtue of these agreements, there will be phenomenal changes in our taxation system, and the realization of the fact that now there is no basis to hide behind the tax system, and we have to introduce the system whereby all the contributors into the economy should also contribute in the taxes of the government. There are certain ground realities which we have to basically consider before we can discuss the tax proposals. There is an overwhelming reliance on the indirect taxes. There is an erosion of tax base effectively. The tax, which is the share of the government income, is generated by using resources, facilities, and infrastructure of the country, is not being collected from those who are required to be taxed. There is continuous pushing of millions of people below the poverty line, and redistribution of wealth is missing, which should be the main objective of any rational tax system. these are the certain goals which we have noted while framing the budget proposals. There should be revenue enhancement, obviously. There should be broadening of tax base. We have to plug the revenue leakages. We have to facilitate the taxpayers. We have to enhance the confidence of the taxpayers. And we have to reduce the compliance requirement. These are basically the key objectives which we had kept in our mind while formulating the budget proposals in our tax committee. The general recommendations of our tax committee is that we have to adopt long-term policies to encourage the investment in the manufacturing sector in Pakistan and reverse the reliance on import. We have to provide the availability of energy at cheap rates, and we have to provide quality education to everyone, and we have to promote the regional trade. These are the general recommendations of the tax committee. And now coming towards the specific proposals of the key proposals of our ICAP, we have looked into our tax laws, and we have noted there that now it's a very, very complicated system of computing the tax liability. Right now, we have to basically consider that how much is the normal tax is applicable on the taxable income. We have to consider the liability of the super tax. We have to consider whether the distribution of profit has been made or not. And if the prescribed distribution has not been made, then we have to basically also compute the tax liability on the undistributed profits. Likewise, there are certain thresholds on the minimum tax, which is on minimum tax on turnover. We have to ensure that there is an alternate corporate tax liability, which is based on the accounting profit that has also been discharged. There is a minimum tax regime on services, and like the final tax regime and the separate blocks of income. These are basically the steps which are involved in arriving at the tax liability. So these are basically the multiple layers of taxes which are effectively creating problems for the taxpayers, and which has effectively resulting in the higher tax rates because the tax liability which is appearing in the books is based on these tax computations. So we have to basically look into this complex system of computing the tax liability, and we have to rationalize this system. In order to promote the organized sector, we have looked into that. Obviously, everyone knows that there is a serious problem of under-invoicing, and we have looked into this issue in detail. And we have noted that there are certain areas which we can consider and try to plug in the loopholes because of which this under-invoicing is being promoted. For example, we have suggested that rupee feeding and remittance from foreign currency account should be restricted to the filers. We have to remove a misconception that the credit entry in the foreign currency account through rupee feeding cannot be inquired and investigated by a tax officer. This is a very, very serious misconception amongst us, that the foreign currency account cannot be investigated by a tax officer. We have to look into what type of entries which come into and going out of the foreign currency account, and which particular entries cannot be looked into by the tax officer and which entries can be looked into by the tax officer. So everyone knows that there is an under-invoicing and how this under-invoicing is being paid, because the supplier outside Pakistan has to be paid. So how they are making payment, we have to see that how the people who are engaged in under-invoicing are making the payment. So in my view, in our committee's view, we have looked into this aspect and noted that the FBR needs to basically educate its tax officers that the rupee feeding into the foreign currency account and then making payment out of those feeding can be investigated by the tax officer. Likewise, we have to basically gradually withdraw the final tax regime, and in a transition, we can consider that converting this final tax regime into minimum tax regime, so that the revenues of the FBR in short term are not affected, and the FBR can ensure that the importers and exporters start preparing books of account. Right now, under these two big categories of the taxpayers, they are although taxpayers, but unfortunately they are not basically maintaining their books of account. They are in fact not preparing the financial statements. So FBR needs to look into this policy measure very seriously, and over a period of time, this final tax regime needs to be rationalized, needs to be reduced, and that can be done over a period of time. Last year, there was a very surprising withdrawal of the measure, which was a very encouraging provision for the manufacturers. 65A that was withdrawn last year, and that was very, very surprising. It is our recommendation that Section 65A should be reintroduced with certain amendments. For example, we are suggesting that the condition of 90% of the sales should be reduced to 75%, and likewise there should be additional tax benefit at the purchases side also. The previous 65A was providing incentive with the condition that at least 90% of the sales are made from the registered persons. We are suggesting that this provision should be further improved, and the credit should be given for the purchases at the purchases side as well. We are also suggesting that the tax rate on the corporate should be further reduced. That we understand that will have a very serious impact on the revenues, but it is very, very also encouraging to note that this government has fulfilled its promise of reducing the corporate tax in the last few years. However, it is our suggestion that the further reduction needs to be looked into to promote the corporate culture. And the last suggestion from the structural reform side is that we are strongly suggesting that the exemption of tax on intercorporate dividend, which was available prior to the two amendments made in Finance Act 15 and 16, the original position of the provisions relating to the group relief and the group taxation needs to be restored to ensure that the groups which are operating in a non-corporate environment, these groups should be encouraged, and by virtue of that, there will be further encouragement for the organized sector. On this subject, harmonization of the federal and provincial taxes, our separate task force had worked on this subject and have had extensive deliberations, and we have now arrived at a product which we want to basically sell to all the stakeholders in our tax system, FBR and all the provincial authorities. We have now developed a standard schedule of the third schedule of the Customs Act, which is basically the listing of the services. We have drawn down the PCT codes, standard description, and the definitions. The objective of doing that is that if we have a standard PCT codes and the description and the standard definitions, and the provinces will just need to go to that list and just pick up which entry they want to tax. Otherwise, rest of the standard first schedule should be adopted by all the provinces, so that there should be no interpretations issues between the provinces and the taxpayers. So this is a very, very extensive work which we have done, and we have our research paper ready, and we want to basically we had planned a roundtable conference of the provincial finance ministers and the federal finance minister, and we are basically on it, and we will inshallah be able to have such a conference very soon, and we will try to basically to explain what we have done in our tax committee. But we feel that this is now a very much a need of the taxpayers and the businessmen, that they know that which entry means what. Right at the moment, there are the one entry which is appearing in one SRB law, the same entry is appearing in the PRA law under a different PCD code description and the definition. So there is a total chaos and confusion among the taxpayers. So that needs to be addressed. We have also suggested that we should try to consider that there is a one single return form which should be collected at one single portal. India has done that, and we can try to do that also. We should have a one single portal and one single tax registration, and all the tax returns relating to the services across Pakistan should be reflected in that return, and that should be submitted at a single portal. And we are also advising that there should be a single authority of audit in Pakistan, and that authority should be authorized to basically conduct the audit of the tax affairs of that particular taxpayers, and the findings of that audit can be disseminated to the tax authorities, for example, if being a FBR or SRB or PRA, because right now what is happening is that one taxpayer is being audited by FBR, SRB, PRA, KPK, and like that. So, and each time the taxpayer has to basically carry its entire books of account and has to explain to that officer that what is lying under the books of account, and each time there are certain assessments and audits and like that. So we are also suggesting that there should be a single audit authority in Pakistan. Obviously this is a very, very huge task, but we have to basically consider this as an object. There should be some process whereby the performance of the tax officer should also be assessed. We have noted that, and obviously because of the pressure from the revenue target, the tax officer made some assessment which does not sustain the appellate level test. So we are suggesting that there should be a certain system whereby, although there must be some system which we don't know exactly, but if we have suggested that there should be a directory which should be published by the FBR and list down the names of the tax officer with this amount of the sales tax and the income tax demands they have raised during the year, and out of those demands how much stand the test of the appeals. That if such kind of any information is available to the public, then that will create a healthy environment, and to have a discussion on what and why the tax demand which were raised could not sustain the appellate test. And we are also suggesting that the list should be published of the taxpayers to whom the refunds are issued. We listen every time from the FBR and the government that they have issued X amount of refunds, but we exactly don't know to whom the refunds have been issued. So if that will create a transparency in the system, that if the list of the person to whom the refunds were issued, when they applied for the refund, and under which head they have got the refunds, if such kind of list is available, then that will create a very healthy environment and bring transparency in the system. There has been a lot of talk about the amnesty scheme recently, and we have basically the tax committee of the ICAP has looked into that aspect, and we after extensive discussion, we have noted that this amnesty, although is a need of the current environment, but as a matter of policy, ICAP has reiterated that the amnesty schemes generally discourages the compliant taxpayers. So that is basically one of the most important part which we had discussed, and there were different views, but we maintained our point of view that generally the amnesty scheme should not be brought, and that discourages the taxpayers. However, if the government is bringing such kind of amnesty, which we are hearing that the government is trying to bring a scheme whereby the foreign assets will be declared, we have made some suggestions that if such a scheme is being under consideration, then we have given certain suggestions to ensure that that such kind of a scheme is not only successful, but in future there should be all the loopholes and the leakages should be plugged in so that